before we begin and I kind of guide you through the vagus nerve and how important it is, could we take a moment to arrive wherever you are? And just notice what's happening for you in this moment. Is your body in anticipation? Are you wondering what this is about? Or are you still playing with the thoughts of today? So let's just arrive. And can you take a moment to notice where you are and how you're sitting? This is going to give you a moment to find that for yourselves. And wherever you are, however your body posture is at the moment, is fine. And if you can tune in and just notice if there's any areas of tension or discomfort or stiffness, or it could be that your body's feeling absolutely fine. But if you can take a moment and then to adjust, just to listen and to adjust to what feels really comfortable for you or easier in this moment. You can change the position of your feet. You can maybe sit back into your seat, whatever that may be for you, is to really take a moment and listen to your body to arrive and find what feels easy and comfortable. So just allowing yourself to come to rest. And resting the body from being in anticipation or alert. And if there are any areas of stiffness, could you self-adjust to soften those areas? And just notice that when you do that, for some of you, there may be a spontaneous sigh that arrives. And that's a good sign that a branch of your vagus nerve has just triggered your diaphragm to release. And it allows you to deepen your breath. And it allows everything to just come to quiet. So yeah, and just notice what that feels like. So I'm going to dive into sharing some of these amazing properties of the vagus nerve and how, just by softening the body, you're stimulating or toning the vagus nerve. And there are different ways to do that. We also don't want to overstimulate and take the vagus nerve into a freeze or shutdown state. So I'm going to guide you through all of that, and hopefully by the end of it, you'll take away something. And I will give you some movement guidelines too, some body practices. So before we dive in, I want to give you a bit of a background on my experience with the vagus nerve. And I've been working with clients with chronic pain for some time. So I have a background not only in somatic movement, I did fitness training and I was a clinical Pilates therapist. And inevitably, we were sent referrals from physios for people struggling with chronic pain, whether it was back, neck, or shoulder pain. And I noticed something really interesting, that when the body was calm, or when they felt calm, or if the movement was soothing, the pain would ease and sometimes go away completely. So that intrigued me. And at that time, we weren't looking at the vagus nerve or the nervous system. So diving into that led me to this idea that, it's not just the body as a nuts and bolts system where posture was the most important thing or strengthening the body was the most important thing. We needed to look at the whole person and what was going on for them. And that's where this intrigue and fascination with the body-mind connection began. But even at that time, I started to sense intuitively what would take care of people. And we all have that in us. We all have this ability to have empathy and compassion. And just that alone, just taking care of someone can really help with their well-being. And we'll see how that works in a moment. But before then, I want to share with you my experience of going into shutdown. So there's a nervous system state called freeze or shutdown, which happened for me about 2 years ago. And I had no idea that it was arriving. But when it did arrive, I thought, wow, You know, I've been helping people with the nervous system for so long. How did this happen to me? And the short answer is that I had a fall, and I was out in Claymont, walking in the nature reserve there, and jumping from rock to rock, and fell and hit my head and had stitches and felt fine. In a week I felt fine, and then the whiplash came in. But 6 months later, I started to notice a difference in my way of being. My mood changes. I put it down to menopause. And these symptoms began that felt so unfamiliar. And I thought, no, this can't be the menopause. Anyway, it turned out that I was experiencing symptoms of head trauma. And it's taken me a while to regulate my nervous system. And I'm going to share with you by the end of our session today on how I've done that, and how I went from having these strong palpitations, that would wake me up at night. So what would happen is I would fall asleep, and I've never had problems with sleep, and I would close my eyes and feel really tired and actually fall asleep for about a minute, and my body would wake me up with these palpitations. And some people describe them as panic attacks. And anyway, it was the most bizarre thing. So I'm going to dive into a couple of slides or a presentation on the vagus nerve, and then share with you some of the things that I did to regulate my sleep. So now I'm back to sleeping 6 or 7 hours a night, and I feel so much better. So at the heart of getting myself out of freeze was learning about the vagus nerve and how it can help us. If we really understand and listen to the state of our nervous system, we're able to manage it in a somatic way. And I will explain what that means in a moment. So the vagus nerve is this nerve that goes directly from the brain to the rest of the body. And what's amazing about it is that it innervates or influences every single organ of the body apart from the adrenal glands, because the adrenal glands are part of the sympathetic nervous system, our alert or active system. So the vagus nerve is the #1 parasympathetic calming nerve of the body. And what's interesting about it is that it has 2 branches, and we'll look at those branches, because people often think that you just turn the vagus nerve and it's fine, and it's just this one nerve that does one thing and just calms the body down. Well, that's not how it works. So what does the vagus do? It kind of slows everything down. So it's the communication system between the brain and the gut. There is a part of the nervous system that works completely independently called the enteric nervous system, and I won't go into great detail with that. But what's important to understand here is that there is a direct link between the brain and the gut. And in fact, we talk about the body-mind connection, but really, if we see them as one, there's no real connection. There's more of an integration. One of the purposes of the vagus nerve is to get us into rest and digest, or rest and relaxation state. And it does that by innervating the diaphragm so that the diaphragm can relax and we're allowed to take deeper breaths. So any diaphragmatic breathing issues that we have can be resolved in the way that we work with toning the vagus nerve. And one thing that I don't do, which I've done many times before in the past, is breathing exercises. And I will explain why later. But I don't do any breath work. I don't even bring awareness to breath. And I've done lots of that in the past. Clients I've had would have issues with a stuck diaphragm and stuckness in the neck and shoulders. And this is why tension and pain occurs, is when there's stuckness in the body. But I stopped teaching breath exercises when I discovered easier ways to release the diaphragm, because really breathing is all about a stuckness in the diaphragm, and we have more than one diaphragm, by the way. There's the respiratory diaphragm, which the vagus nerve innervates, and then we have others within the body. When we start to regulate the nervous system and particularly work with vagal tone, it decreases inflammation in the body. So it releases neurotransmitters or hormones like serotonin, and oxytocin is the other, which changes the environment that all the living cells are in. And that environment is linked to our connective tissue. It's really, really important to know that. And that's the area that I'm really intrigued with and that I work with. You can change the chemistry of your body just by toning the vagus nerve. It lowers your heart and blood pressure, but we also have to make sure that we're not lowering it too far and going into a shutdown state. And it can help with anxiety. So fear management, and that's the purpose of this evening, is to look at how do we calm a fear body through a somatic practice. Somatic meaning of the body, through the body, instead of trying to think differently. We're exploring sensation. So it's a bottom-up approach. Anything that you do working with the body is seen as a sensory feedback system, an afferent feedback from the body to the brain. So when the vagus nerve is in dysregulation, and this is if the nervous system is in dysregulation, but I talk about the vagus nerve. If the vagus nerve is not functioning, or if the autonomic nervous system is in dysregulation, you're going to have these symptoms. One of these, it's either not sleeping well, any tension in the body, autoimmune conditions, fibromyalgia is a big one at the moment, gut issues, low energy, heart palpitations, even hot flushes. So there's this myth that, every menopausal woman will have hot flushes, but that's not true. There's something else that happens in the nervous system, and that's just a whole separate course in itself. So to remember that anything that happens in the nervous system that's dysregulated leads to a physiological or a psychological symptom. And in my practice, I work with the physiological symptoms. So if someone arrives with chronic pain or they have tension in the body, that's my way into regulating the nervous system. And it's a really gentle way. It's an effective way. So that's the way that I like to work with it. I like to work with regulating the nervous system through the body and looking at the physiological systems, physiological symptoms. Body and mind are connected. I used to spend ages trying to explain how. And the simple thing is everyone's experienced either butterflies in their tummy or dry throat, heart palpitations when they're nervous, or even if you're in love, the emotional experience has a physiological response. And that's how we look at the body-mind connection or integration. I like to use the word integration. It's a whole system that's integrated. So any emotional sensation will have a physiological response. The nervous system is really important because it keeps us alive. It's our communication system. It also helps us to know ourselves. So we're going to look at how you can use the states of the nervous system to recognize where you're at any time in your life, any moment of the day. You can begin to tune into your body and really listen to what's happening for you. By the way, we often say the body never lies. The body does lie. And I'll go into that in a while. I mean, I always felt like, the body is just sensation and it never lies. But yeah, it does. And if you think about an easy example I can give you is when you are going through an autonomic state, a sympathetic response, for example, and we link that to food cravings. Even though we know that vegetables or a salad, if I had to put a salad in front of you and a piece of chocolate cake, if you were in a regulated state, you might make a choice for your body that would, go for the salad. But if you are in a dysregulated state, your body goes into a stress response and you would go for the chocolate cake, perhaps. So these habitual patterns that arrive for us, these associations that we make, triggers a sensation in the body that is so strong that we can't stop that sensation. So the sensation is real. The body doesn't choose the green salad. It's going to go for the chocolate cake. Your body's craving for it. So this is what I mean when I say, you know, the body lies, and a fear body can do that too. So really recognizing what that fear is, manage the fear response. And this is where somatic practices, which is listening to the body, really helps. But also not just listening to the body, but practicing body practices that bring your body to calm. And we did that at the very beginning of the session, was just to sit and listen to where it feels, where you feel a bit of discomfort. And even now you can experience again, you know, how's my body feeling now, and self-adjust and just find that space of rest and ease. And you can do that at any time and at any moment in any place. And I call that the calm response. And I will share that with you a bit later too. So your nervous system, when it is in dysregulation, the entire chemistry changes and it leads to inflammation. When you change your mood, it changes your chemistry. And so you're producing your own anti-inflammatories or feel-good hormones in your body. So finding ways to do that, and simple ways, will really begin to strengthen your immune system and help your vagus nerve to come into regulation. So sensory amnesia, this is when we are disconnected from our bodies. So not everyone has a body awareness. We're often in our heads. We're always thinking things through. Language like, you know, I'll think about it, or let me think about it. We never say, you know, let me notice how that feels for me. Or, you know, how does that land? Or how does that emerge? And we're disconnected from our bodies. We never notice how the body's responding in a sensory nature to how we think, how we feel, how we move or don't move. Even if you're exercising and you think that you are exploring or understanding where your body is in space, you guide you through a fitness practice or a body practice, asking you to place your feet hip distance apart, you know, have your hip bones facing forward. That's body awareness. It doesn't tell you, or you're not aware of how having your feet hip distance apart, whether that is comfortable for your body, whether the sensation in your body is saying, oh, that feels easy, that feels good, or whether you know, your body feels that it feels a little tense, or there's a bit of tightness in the hip when you have your feet hip distance apart. And I'm just giving you an example. So we treat the body as this mechanical system, a nuts and bolts system, this thing that we have to align and get into a perfect posture or strengthen. And if we're working in this disconnected way, we're missing out on including the whole of ourselves. And we're missing such an incredible resource that we have from within, this somatic part of us, this soma. Soma is a word that comes from Greek, and it means body. And I would take it a bit further and say of the body, or emerging from the body, where we can access our true nature. So sensory amnesia is linked to numbing that sensation, numbing that somatic awareness, or that sensation of, you know, if I'm standing with my feet hip distance apart, or if I'm aligning my spine, how comfortable does that feel? And you can try that even now, you know, whilst I'm talking. You can stand And if you've been practicing any type of alignment therapy or Pilates or even yoga, and just noticing what it feels like to stand in an aligned way, how does your body respond to that? You know, do you notice how much space you have within, or do you only think about the line of your spine, for example? So I'm giving you an example of sensory awareness or somatic awareness, and sensory amnesia prevents us from experiencing that. So in soma sensing, which is this practice that I've created, helps us to dive into that and to notice our bodies and to notice where we are, how our body's responding, even in conversation. So it takes you from being disembodied to embodied. And it's so important because it really tunes into our true nature. For us to cultivate this somatic awareness, we need to dive into the autonomic nervous system. And for me to explain to you why we have sensory amnesia and why sometimes it's important to have a numbing sensation in your body, especially if you are in overwhelm or if you are trying to get your body to function in a survival state. So the nervous system is split into the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. I'm going to dive into the peripheral nervous system. Means the nerves that go through your spinal cord and the rest of the body. So it allows you for information from the outside to come in. The central nervous system is linked to your brain. And I think that's where the issue for me lies, is it kind of separates the two. But for the purpose of anatomy, I'm simply sharing that with you. So the autonomic nervous system is part of the peripheral nervous system, which makes sense because that's the part where information comes in, right? It keeps you alive. And information comes in unconsciously. It has to. You can't be, your body cannot listen, or you cannot consciously take in all the sensory information that's coming. Thing that Stephen Porges calls neuroception. It unconsciously decides whether something is harmful or whether it's healing, whether he calls it safe, whether it's unsafe, or whether it's unsafe. And all of this happens unconsciously, and your responses to it are involuntary. The autonomic nervous system is linked to all your automatic functions, the functions of all your organs, your digestion. So it functions at an automatic level for your bodily functions, but also your survival state. So that's what the autonomic nervous system does. It's constantly adjusting to whether you need to take action or whether you need to rest. And sometimes it's not very clear because we haven't really found a way yet. I don't know if it'll ever happen, but the primitive part of our brain cannot identify whether whether we are in real danger or perceived danger. So understanding how we function helps us to regulate the nervous system if we know how it works. So we make these associations, and it's called neuroception, through our five senses. That's what we've been taught, through taste, touch, smell, and we're constantly adjusting. We have a sixth sense. In fact, we have maybe a seventh or eighth sense. So the enteric nervous system is sometimes seen as a sixth sense, but your fascial system is what I call your sixth sense, and I will share how important your fascia, your connective tissue is. It is also a sense that is, has not only billions of neurons, but electromagnetic and biophotons, and these three energetic systems, possibly more. And it's constantly responding and attuning. Your whole body is constantly trying to attune and bring you back into resonance. So in the bioenergetic field, we talk about resonance. In the nervous system, nerves, we call it regulation. And they're just different terms. It just means, whichever you use. I like to use resonance when we're in dissonance, or whether we are in resonance. From a vagus nerve perspective, we can look at regulation or vagal tone, and I'll go into that a little more. It's really important for this unconscious state of ours to function. It's the only way we can learn and make associations. So an association of an experience is held as a memory in the brain. So your brain remembers these sensory inputs from the body, and it also remembers whether the experience was pleasant or unpleasant, whatever that is. If you placed your hand on a hot plate, for example, or as a child, wondering and being curious and exploring things and putting things into your mouth, or children put things into their mouths, sometimes they might be pleasant or unpleasant. If you place your hand on a hot plate and you immediately withdraw your hand because your body is in survival mode. So you now make an association that, okay, if I touch that, that's hot. In a learning, from a learning perspective, we start to create habits. So the first time you tied your shoelace or rode a bike or drove a car, there was a learning process that happens, and that learning process becomes automatic, and that's really important. So this sensory information that's coming in becomes habitual. We also make associations with how we feel, and this is where our perception of life can differ from one person to the other. You know, what I might find anxious, you may not find as a situation, you may not find anxious. You know, our perception of the world, of what's scary and what's not scary, is based on the associations we make with it. Of course, there are real dangers, but there's also this perceived danger. And this is talking about the spider. If you are terrified of spiders, it's going to create a sympathetic response, this desire to fight or flee. Your whole body physiology changes. The entire chemistry changes. So it's important for the autonomic nervous system to create the state, but at the same time, if you have an unhelpful habit, we're exploring how to create a new habit. And the best way to create a new habit is through the body, if it's fear-based. And one of the practices of soma sensing is to create a habit of calm. So this is the parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system. And as you can see, they work in opposition. So while the sympathetic nervous system, and you know, everyone thinks, just to be clear here, we need our sympathetic nervous system. We need our sympathetic nervous system for our vital functions, to see, hear, taste, touch, smell, to be on alert, to be active. So it's not the bad part of the autonomic nervous system. And I'm sure people here kind of know that, but I just want to emphasize that because it does get this bad rap. At the same time, we do need to understand it and to understand that we are in a hyper-aroused state, that we are way too much in sympathetic. And we need to find a way of regulating so that we can find harmony and resonance. Oh, I love that word, harmony. Harmony is another word I love using. Instead of looking at it as these two opposite sides, like fire and water, or yin and yang are seen as these two opposing sides, or these two parts that we need. But it's not quite like that in the nervous system. And it's only been possibly 10 years that we've begun to look at Stephen Porges and the Polyvagal Theory. So in the Polyvagal Theory, you have your autonomic nervous system, you have the parasympathetic and the sympathetic, the yin and the yang. But then if you go to the parasympathetic, you have two branches of the vagus nerve. So if we're looking at the parasympathetic, we're really focusing on this vagus nerve, which goes from the brain to every organ of your body. And because it's such it's a wandering nerve, it goes right from the cranium, the back of your neck. So where the neck and the head join is the cranium. it bypasses the spine. So it doesn't go through the spine. It goes directly to your heart and your lungs, your throat. There's a part that goes above the diaphragm, and then there's the other that goes below the diaphragm. So the dorsal part goes to below the diaphragm to the gut, to the sexual organs, and the ventral part go to the heart and lungs, and also to innervate your auditory, your listening, your smell, your eyesight as well. So, which is why when you're in a calm state, or if you were ever asked to meditate and soften your eyes, it's kind of an outside-in approach to calming the sympathetic response and toning. There are better ways in really finding this harmony between all parts of the autonomic nervous system, so that you're not overstimulating the vagus nerve to go into its dorsal or shutdown state. So the polyvagal theory is a theory that was developed by Stephen Porges, and it was way back, I think, in the 1970s, and even probably further back into the 1960s, because he talks about 1969. And it's only the 1980s, and during, I think for me, it was in 2009 when it started to kind of come into how we can explore well-being by stimulating vagal tone. So in the polyvagal theory, the nervous system, or the autonomic nervous system, has 3 states, and he calls them social engagement, which is the green, the fight-flight, which is the aggressive defensive state, and freeze and fold, or the passive state. So he gives them this color of green being safe, yellow being danger, and life-threatening being red. And I'll explain why Stephen Porges does that. So social engagement, we now refer to as connection, because just to kind of emphasize, the language that is being used sometimes is cognitive language, or analytical language. And in somatic practices, and it's changing in the polyvagal theory too, we're starting to use felt emotional language, so that it resonates and lands in the body in a way that begins to already shift our nervous system. So social engagement can also be referred to as connection, or heart-centered connection, your heart-centered state. And I want to just go into a practice right now, wherever you are. If you're in sitting, if you can tune into your body as we did at the start. It's just a very quick practice. Just take a moment to tune into your body and notice if your body is on alert. Is it in a sympathetic state? It may also have some discomfort. So if you can adjust. And some of the things to explore is, as you are adjusting, can you find any areas of stiffness that might need softening? You can go to your pelvis and find where the pelvis feels most at rest. And tuning into your inner body is just to find your place of rest, or really just find where it feels comfortable. And notice if you arrive in a spontaneous sigh. If you do, that's great. And just taking that moment, just allowing your body to come to rest. And if it helps, can you place your hand, whether it's your right hand or left hand, won't matter, just placing a hand on your heart. Now allowing your hand to rest on your heart. And notice what happens when you rest your hand. You can have both hands or one hand. And notice if that changes body sensation. And if you have felt a shift, just means that you have softened the area around your heart, which gives you a softness in the diaphragm, and it might make you feel calmer. So that's kind of that safe, connected state. Connected state is where you're calm and you feel open to receive. In that state of connection, your parasympathetic state is in ventral vagal. Ventral vagal meaning the ventral vagal part of your nervous system, or sorry, your vagus nerve is in tone, or it's in regulation. It allows you to change. You'll notice that the voice changes, your eyes may soften, your facial expression might change. So these are all the things to notice when you come to rest. So when you're in rest, you'll notice these little changes that happen in your body, and they're all linked to the ventral vagal state. If we go to the yellow nervous system, so if you're in anticipation of, what you need to be doing tomorrow, for example, if you think about, oh my gosh, we're going into shutdown on Thursday, do we need to stock food? Are we going to be able to go out and walk? What am I going to do with my children? What's going to happen for me? Just listening to that language, notice what happens to that area around your heart that you just softened. Okay, so that gets us into fight, flight, and the physiology changes really quickly. The life-threatening state is shutdown and immobilization. So if mobilization, the yellow state, is I need to get moving, what's going to happen? I've got to get stuff sorted out. Heart rate increases, muscle tension increases, and you may go into a bit of activity. And the extreme of that is fear. Even if we do get into that state, it's noticing it. It's not living with guilt or shame that, oh my gosh, I shouldn't be in that state. I just want to make that clear. We're human beings. We're going to fluctuate between these states. But it's how do we regulate it for well-being? The third one, and sometimes it's important to be in fight flight. So just to clarify that. In your life, and we're going to fluctuate between those three. The life-threatening state is a really interesting one because it also involves your vagus nerve, and it's the dorsal part of your vagus nerve. It's the one where you feel very low in energy, not motivated to do anything. You might feel you wake up in the mornings or you can't sleep at night, and all you want to do is just lie on the sofa or binge watch Netflix. And the physiological symptoms is that your heart rate slows down. And in a life-threatening situation, it's almost like your body's preparing to shut down to shut down for death. That's what the dorsal state does. So although we don't go into that extreme, most of us, we experience moments of that. And as long as we can come out of that, it's not a great place to be in that dorsal shutdown, a feeling of helpless or hopeless, a hopelessness state. And that's what people don't really understand, including myself. When I first looked at parasympathetic and sympathetic, I just thought it was this binary balance system in the body. But the vagus nerve branches out into two, and you have ventral and you have dorsal state. So I really need to emphasize that, because what we're beginning to recognize is that if someone is in a dorsal state, meditation or yoga nidra is not the best way for them to get out of their state. So sometimes we think that, it'll be good for someone to do meditation. No, not always. We need to understand the nervous system to understand where we are at in our resonance. So where we want to be most of the time is this connected, heart-centered space where we're calm, the body's pain-free. You have your energy during the day, you're feeling active in the morning, your circadian rhythms work well, you feel tired in the evening, tired enough by 10 p.m. to want to now rest and put your body to rest with people. And, you know, everything's kind of just cool. It's working well. And you kind of may fluctuate during the day. It's your bounce back state. It's your back. So it's learning how to manage life. You know, you may be stuck in traffic one moment, but you're able to bounce back. And signs that you're okay is that you can sleep well. Your body clock is working really well. Food-wise, you're not kind of having these spikes throughout the day or craving things, or, you know, you're in harmony. And, you know, you're going to have moments, but you can cope with it. In this state, your body's producing oxytocin. It's your nurture hormone. It's your hormone of compassion and gratitude and appreciation, alongside serotonin. But oxytocin is that hormone. It's the one where you hug someone, or you don't even need to hug someone. You can tune into your body and just find that softness within releases oxytocin. And the 2 body practices that we just did in the session is designed to release oxytocin. So the physical information that you receive from your body, where you have tension in the body, if you find the softness, and I know it might go against all these things about strengthening your body and aligning your body, but trust me, the body is designed not in the way that we thought. It's completely different to how we thought we need to be. So being in a soft body is okay, feeling held rather than having to hold yourself upright. And I'll do a little practice with you in a moment with that. If you are in freeze response, these are the symptoms that will arise. We've gone through them. You know, the low heartbeat is a really difficult one to recognize. People often think that high blood pressure and heart disease are associated and it's really dangerous. Well, hey, shutdown is really bad because you don't recognize that you're in it. And it happened to me, and I'll share with you in our Q&A how my shutdown state, what happened. I actually, my heart rate would go so low that my body would wake me up after a minute of falling asleep. So that's what shutdown state is. Your body's preparing to literally shut down. So vagal tone is the answer, and vagal tone in a way that stimulates ventral vagal and not so much the dorsal state. So not the relaxation state, but a calm state. So there's a difference between relaxation and calm. I'm very careful with using the word relaxation. I don't actually use it. In fact, I've very rarely in the past have I used it too. Something else that I want to share about the vagus nerve, which I don't think I've mentioned, is that it's linked to the chakras. It has these bundles of nerves or plexus. You would have heard of the solar plexus. The solar plexus goes to the heart and lungs. And if you look at this image, you'll see the rings around where those plexus, those bunch of nerves, go to different parts of the body, and they are intuitively linked to the chakras, or the felt sense of people in ancient body practices would have felt those sensations, which is incredible. It's amazing that they were felt experiences and they were being spoken about in yoga and Tai Chi and Qigong before we even knew about it scientifically. So just want to add that. So somosensing is a therapy that I've been exploring over the last 10 years. And I help people to regulate the nervous system through the body. It's not always movement. It could be simply, being out in nature. So somosensing in nature. And there's a way of somosensing in nature that's designed to keep your ventral vagal state alive and alert. I spoke about fascia, and this is my sixth sense of fascia. Fascia is connective tissue. It is everywhere in the body. We call it the fascia matrix. If you think about tendons, ligaments, those are the obvious fascial connective tissue that has a lot of collagen, but nobody ever thinks about fascia as being your teeth or your saliva or bone as well. So all of those are connective tissue made from the same material in differing amounts. So you've got loose fascial tissue, you've got dense fascial tissue, and then you have the fascial matrix, which is the gel in between, and it's everywhere, absolutely everywhere. And that gel and everything else is super sensitive. The nerve endings within the fascial tissue are said to be 7 times more sensitive than your eyeball or your muscle. So before you even move a muscle, your fascia is responding. So just want to throw that in. So just a little bit more about fascia. If you want to know more, you can go to fasciaresearch.org. If you are an anatomy geek, it will tell you where fascia is, and it keeps changing. Oh gosh, I mean, this fascial matrix shapes the body, and we are self-organizing, self-adjusting, a self-shaping organism that doesn't shape in a line, but in a multi-dimensional, shape-shifting organism is probably the best way I can describe it. Robert Schleip is one of my teachers. He's a fascia researcher based in Ulm University in Germany. I've been working and learning from him for the past 10 years. There's others, but Robert Schleip talks about fascia as a sensory tissue. There's a lot of research that he does. If you want to know more, you can message me, or just put his name in, and you'll find lots and lots of information. And what Robert is working on is how fascia responds to stress, how it stiffens in the body, so how the chemistry changes. And what's important, what's like the most exciting thing about this is that instead of seeing fascia as this inert tissue that just is a scaffolding for the body, it's actually a living environment that every single living cell lives within the fascial matrix. So the health of the fascial tissue is really important. So yes, we have the vagus nerve, but we can influence the vagus nerve through making sure this fascial tissue is hydrated. So movement, somatic movement in particular, in fact, I'll go one step further, intuitive movement is really impactful to our living environment, if I can call it that. So fascia is our fabric of, I call it our fabric of embodiment. It's shaped by our felt experience from the time we start to form as an embryo. We have a blueprint, an embodied blueprint that we're born with. That embodied blueprint was shaped even before we were born. And that's the most exciting part. And one of the practices that I explore is intuitive movement, that we were born with it. There are certain movements that emerge, and I will share one of them with you, which you already know, and you'll be like, wow, well, I knew that already. But there's things like rocking to self-soothe is an embodied blueprint. We spontaneously or intuitively rock a baby to soothe, don't we? We may find ourselves rocking to self-soothe. There are other embodied blueprints that emerge in movement. And that was a fascination for me, how in fascial movement, there are rocking motions that hydrate the tissue when it's stiff. So we want to keep this environment healthy for the nervous system. So soma sensing, this practice, we tune into our true nature, into those embodied blueprints, and working with the body as designed by nature, what Stephen Levin, an orthopedic surgeon who calls it biotensegrity. The body is designed in a geometrical, 3-dimensional, not 2-dimensional structure. So the body as designed by nature, for me, the felt sense just happens. You begin to find spiral motion. And I just don't look at posture and alignment anymore. And it's based on moving intuitively. But what's amazing about this is it begins to regulate your nervous system in such an incredible way. I can't even describe it. Words can't describe it. You will have to experience it. So I'm going to share with you pandiculation, which is one of them. Pandiculation is that early morning urge to stretch and yawn. That's what it is, and it arrives in so many different ways. So I'm going to share that with you. And before that, I want to just go through how I came out of freeze. I had the symptoms of freeze. I was like, oh my word, what's happened? And I was just grateful that I had the resources. I was told that I needed to have a pacemaker, and that for me was like, what? You know, how could have that happened? You know, for someone like myself who's been working with people. But yeah, I had the fall. There were lots of. It was a kind of build-up of things, and we don't realize how we hold trauma in the body. So I've experienced so much in the last 2 years, and this is the stuff that. And you don't have to go into a nature reserve for that. When I say walking in nature, I mean even a park, even in your neighborhood, if you have trees. It's so important to have nature, even if it's in your garden. But you have to get out into nature and walk in nature, because fractals are patterns of geometry based on sacred geometry, spiral geometry, the Fibonacci spiral. We are based on the Fibonacci spiral. We are designed to heal in nature. So that's the first thing. And there's a way, in the soma sensing way, it's also an embodied approach to being in nature. But even if you don't have that, just walking in nature, reducing the noise, the frequency at which we resonate. So man-made machinery noise is not good for us. Car noise, or even the noise of people in a sympathetic state. Did you know that your voice changes when you are in a sympathetic state versus a ventral vagal state? So noise, any type of noise, it can even be bright light noise. Light can make a difference. So listening to your body and what's irritating it in that moment. Connecting with people that have the capacity to hold space for you. So people who are in a good space that can, I call it holding space for you. So I was always holding space for other people. So when it came to my own nervous system, going to visit some really good friends of mine in the UK was the best thing. They really held space for me. So connecting with people, my family, I have an incredible family, and they held space for me. Tuning into your circadian rhythms. So learning how to switch off your technology, because technology is not a great thing to have on at night all the time. I mean, if you do have it on, you might want to listen to audio, whether it's meditation, but it really depends on the type of meditation, to down regulate or regulate your nervous system, not so much down regulate, but just regulate. And yeah, I found that if I listened to a voice, if I couldn't sleep and I'd listen to a voice that would stimulate my ventral vagal state, that would calm me down and put me to sleep. So the frequency makes a difference. Circadian rhythm means getting daylight, having sunlight is so important. It makes a difference to your resonance. So really regulating your daylight, and at night having dim lights, creating a space that takes care of you. It might be candles, it might be aromatherapy oils. All of those things really help to bring your sleep state into regulation. So the circadian rhythms have a lot to do with your sleep state. In the freeze state, the last thing I felt like, I didn't have the energy to eat well. I didn't have the energy to cook stuff for myself or stress about eating well. And it really helped me to understand where people were at. But the one thing I did, because I was, when I did feel well, I mean, I was eating really well before this whole trauma event happened. And one thing I did make sure of is that I had a green smoothie every day. I mean, almost every day. There may have been 1 or 2 days, but honestly, that's the one thing I did. I tried to get everything into a smoothie in the mornings, and if I needed to, I'd have that smoothie at least 2 or 3 times a day. So that, and maybe having convenient stuff like soups with lots of vegetables, soup with lots of vegetables. So finding ways to take care of yourself, or I would go a step further, if you can afford it, is get someone to make stuff for you that tastes good. Healthy food that tastes good is really important. So feeling taken care of and finding ways that will take care of you that doesn't take up too much of your capacity. And then finally, the moving intuitively, the sensing movement, which I will share with you in a moment, some of the movement practices that I teach. And I will be running a 6-week online course taking you through those movements and other ways to regulate your nervous system. And movement for me was the big thing. Walking in nature and other stimulating ventral vagal movements. So I am going to take you through a movement practice first. It's called Panda chelation. And if everyone can just go, I've been sitting for a long period of time and I just need to unwind. And going to this spontaneous stretch and yawn. I call it a stretch. So just exploring that a few times. And after experiencing that spontaneous, I've been sitting for a long time, just noticing how the state of your body changes. So that's the first thing, okay? And in the soma sensing movement course that I'm going to start on the 31st of March, we go through that in a way that will help you to get right down into your lower spine, because that's where the stiffest part of your fascial tissue is. We want to expand the body. This unwinding is very different to a yoga stretch, and you want to replace stretching with Panda chelation. I can't emphasize how important that is. And just by finding these spontaneous stretching motions, just notice how that feels. So that's Panda chelation. And I'm going to show you one more for the vagus nerve. I call it the soft body bounce. And this is what it looks like. So if you come up to standing, you're going to come up to standing. Okay, and in standing, you won't need to see the whole of me. If you imagine that your body is a container, so just come to standing. And from standing in upright, could you allow your body to soften? So just to soften, and you'll notice when I'm softening, my knees release as well. And imagine, and then you start bouncing. So the practice is imagining that your body is like a container of jelly, like it's jelly, and your jelly is really stiff. And what you want is to soften the jelly. So if you can tune in and just check in with where you're at and start to just bounce. Okay, and I'm going to show you the lower part. So it's just okay, and that's what I call the soft body bounce. You just bouncing softly. So in that body bounce, it's really important to soften the inner body. So you're not collapsing, but softening and just bouncing out the tension in your body. It's really simple. So check in, where are the tense areas and can I just bounce them out? So that's another really simple practice. And the last one is what is a tapping. So if you're feeling a little bit of tension in the body. The place you want to tap, and it's not like EFT, is this area here. This diaphragm, you have a diaphragm up here that gets tight. If you're thinking too much, it tightens up your shoulders. So just with a light fist, or with your 3 fingers, you want to take these 3 fingers and tap out the fascial tissue around your chest area, around your heart. Just tap it out, and you might find that the body moves a little, and you may notice that your breathing changes. Okay, so that's another one, and it also just allows you to take a moment. And the very first practice that we did is what I call the calm response. So that practice is 3 steps. You take a moment to pause. So pause is a really powerful tool. Wherever you are, whenever you want, wherever you are, whenever, you can pause when you're sitting in conversation, even when you're driving. You can take a moment to pause, tune in, and just soften your body, soften any stiff areas in your body. And if you feel a spontaneous sigh, it means that you've released the diaphragm and you've calmed, you can calm your body. You can go from stiff to calm or tension to calm very easily with that practice, which I call the calm response.